He said it with a smile. Not the warm kind. The other kind is the particular smile of someone who believes they have arranged a situation so completely in their favor that they can afford to let you see it on their face. The smile of someone who has been planning something for a long time and has finally arrived at the moment when the plan becomes visible. You have no idea what's coming, he said. He was right about one thing. I did not know what was coming, but neither did he. My name is Rebecca. I had been married to Thomas for 11 years. We had built something, a business together, that had started in the way that some of the best things start. Small, underfunded, carried forward, on the particular stubborn energy of two people who believe in what they are building and are willing to put everything into it. The business had grown. Thomas had changed. Not all at once. These things never happen all at once. They happen in the particular accumulation of small shifts that each seem, individually, manageable. A change in how decisions were made. A change in whose name appeared on documents. A change in the particular balance of power inside, something that had been built by two people, but that was gradually and then suddenly being claimed by one. I had noticed. I had raised it, multiple times, in conversations that began as discussions and ended as the particular one-sided exchanges of someone who has already decided what the outcome will be and is simply waiting for the other person to accept it. Thomas had been preparing something. I understood that in retrospect. In the months before the smile, before the conference, room and the attorney and the stack of documents he placed on the table, with the particular deliberateness of someone who has rehearsed this moment. Thomas had been building a case, gathering documentation, constructing a version of our business and our partnership that was designed to reach one conclusion: that the business was his, that my contribution, 11 years of it, the particular investment of someone who had given everything she had to something she believed in, was either minimal or non-existent, or, in the most damaging version of the narrative he had constructed, fraudulent. He had spent 18 months on it. He had engaged an attorney who had spent a further 6 months refining it. He had scheduled this meeting in a conference room at that attorney's office, with documents stacked and positions prepared and the smile already in place when I walked through the door, with the confidence of someone who has done everything correctly and is ready to watch the result unfold. You have no idea what's coming, he said. I sat down. I put my bag on the table, and I thought about the phone call I had received 4 months earlier from a woman I had not spoken to in 3 years. A former colleague of Thomas's, someone who had worked alongside him in a previous role, someone who had called me out of nowhere on a Wednesday afternoon and said, "I need to tell you something. I think you need to know what Thomas has been doing." 4 months. I had known for 4 months, and I had spent every one of those months making sure that when this moment came, when Thomas sat across a conference table with his attorney and his stack of documents and his smile, I was not the person he thought I was going to be. "You're right," I said. "Tell me." The smile widened slightly. He had no idea what was in my bag. The woman who called me was named Sandra. She had worked with Thomas at a firm he had been involved with before our business. Briefly, a consultancy arrangement that had ended. I had always understood, by mutual agreement. What Sandra told me on that Wednesday afternoon was that the ending had not been mutual. Thomas had been asked to leave. Not publicly, not in the way that produces formal documentation and industry-wide knowledge, quietly in the way that certain departures happen when the people involved understand that a quiet exit serves everyone's interests better than a public accounting. He had been asked to leave because of financial irregularities. Specifically, money that had moved through accounts in ways that were not sanctioned, not disclosed, and not consistent with the role he had been in. The firm had not pursued formal action. They had simply ended the arrangement and moved on. As organizations sometimes do when the cost of accountability is weighed against the cost of a managed departure, Thomas had moved on too, into our business, where he had over 11 years, had access to accounts and financial processes, and the particular trust of a partner who had never had reason to look at the records the way Sandra's information was now making me look at them. I called my attorney the day after Sandra's call. Her name was Claire Walsh. She had handled the legal structure of our business from the beginning: contracts, partnerships, the foundational documents that established what the business was and who had built it. She knew the records. She knew the history. And when I told her what Sandra had told me, she was quiet for a long moment and then said, "How far back do you want to go?" "As far as the records go," I said. What Claire and her forensic accounting contact found over the following 3 months was not simple. Thomas had been careful. I want to be precise about that. He was not careless. The financial irregularities that Sandra had described from his previous firm had apparently been educational. He had learned from them. What he had constructed inside our business over 11 years was more sophisticated, more layered, more difficult to identify, unless you were looking for it specifically and had the expertise to understand what you were seeing. But it was there. Money that had moved in ways that served Thomas's interests rather than the business's. Decisions documented in ways that overstated his contribution and understated mine. A paper trail that had been constructed. I understood now, looking at it clearly, to support exactly the narrative he was planning to present across that conference table, his version of 11 years, which was not accurate. I spent 3 months understanding exactly how inaccurate it was, and then I spent 1 month making sure that every piece of what Claire had found was documented, verified, and organized in a way that could be presented clearly, completely, and without any possibility of being explained away. I walked into that conference room with everything in my bag. Thomas's attorney spoke for 40 minutes. He was thorough and confident and presented the version of 11 years that Thomas had constructed with the particular polish of someone who is prepared for this specific presentation. I listened to all of it. I did not interrupt. I did not react visibly. I let him finish. And then I looked at Thomas, at the smile that was still there, slightly at the edges, and I said, "I'd like to respond now." His attorney nodded, expecting, I think, the beginning of a negotiation, the opening position of someone who had been cornered and was now working out how to minimize what they lost. I reached into my bag, and I placed a folder on the table. Not the folder Thomas had prepared. A different one, considerably thicker. "This is a forensic accounting report," I said, "covering 11 years of financial records. I'd like to walk you through it." Thomas's attorney looked at the folder. Then at Thomas. Thomas was no longer smiling. The meeting that Thomas had scheduled for 1 hour lasted 3.5. Not because the discussion was balanced, because the documentation was comprehensive and required time to be properly understood. Claire walked through it, section by section, transaction by transaction, decision by decision, and with the particular patience of someone who has prepared something completely and is in no hurry. Thomas's attorney asked questions, good ones, and he was doing his job, looking for the gaps, the interpretations, the alternative explanations. Claire answered every one of them, directly, with the corresponding documentation. At some point, I cannot identify the exact moment, but I felt it in the room. Thomas's attorney stopped looking at Claire and started looking at Thomas, with the particular expression of someone who is revising their understanding of the situation they are in. Thomas had not told his attorney everything. That was clear. The conversations that happened in the room after that, between Thomas and his attorney, conducted in the lowered voices of people who are aware. They are being observed, were not ones I was part of. What I could see was the general shape of them, the adjustment, the reassessment, the particular conversation that happens when an attorney discovers that the position they have been given is not as strong as they were led to believe. At the end of the meeting, Thomas's attorney asked for a recess. Time to review the documentation. Time to confer with his client. We agreed. A week. During that week, I heard from Claire twice. Once to tell me that Thomas's attorney had requested the source documentation for 3 of the forensic accounting findings. once to tell me that he had reviewed them and had not challenged their accuracy. At the end of the week, there was a second meeting. Thomas was quieter in this one. The negotiation that followed was not the negotiation Thomas had planned. The position he had constructed, the one that placed him as the primary contributor, that minimized my role, that was designed to produce an outcome in which the business continued under his control, and I left with significantly less than 11 years deserved. That position did not survive contact with the documentation. What I walked away with reflected 11 years accurately. Not dramatically more. I was not interested in punishment. I was interested in accuracy, in the truth of what had been built and who had built it being reflected correctly in what each of us received. The accuracy was significant. Thomas's attorney filed one formal challenge to the forensic accounting findings. It was reviewed by an independent third party and dismissed. The business was restructured. My involvement was concluded in a way that was fair, genuinely fair, in the legal sense that comes from documentation rather than negotiation. Sandra called me the week after everything was finalized. I heard it went well, she said. It went accurately, I said, which is what I needed. She was quiet for a moment. I should have called sooner, she said, when I first knew what he was doing. You called, I said. That's what mattered. I thought about the 4 months between Sandra's call and the conference room, about Claire and her forensic accounting contact, and 3 months of understanding. Something completely before doing anything about it, about the folder in my bag, and the moment Thomas's smile had disappeared. I think about that moment sometimes. Not with satisfaction exactly. Satisfaction would be too simple for something this complicated. What I feel is something closer to completion. The particular feeling of someone who has been thorough, who has done the work, built the record, prepared the documentation, and has stood in a room where the documentation mattered. Here is what 11 years and a phone call from Sandra and a very thorough forensic accountant taught me. The people who corner you are counting on the corner being real. They are counting on you having nowhere to go, on the documentation being incomplete, on the record being unclear enough that their version of events can fill the space. Fill the space first. Document everything. Build the record before you need it. And when someone sits across a table and tells you they have you cornered, reach into your bag and show them what 11 years of accuracy looks like. He thought he had me cornered. He had spent 18 months arranging the corner. He had not accounted for the 4 months I had spent preparing for it. The judge's file said otherwise, and so did every page in that folder.